660 years ago, on the island of Sakishima Shoto, there lived an upright samurai by the name of Botan Koto. Now a fine fisherman, he desired plenty and peace. Botan retired after the Great War when he met his lovely lady. They married quickly in the joy of their youth and settled in a small, serene village. A few years passed. The people prospered in peace, and Botan fathered 3 cheerful children, their life filled with joy never to cease, until sadly there at last arrived a villain. Then a dark day came most men would dread, the day of death and destruction when fire and flame came to be. Botan was returning to port when he saw the smoke arise, hearing as he neared their screams and their cries. He docked his boat and ran toward the fight, but he suddenly came across a terrible sight. His children lay slain in the street, while his wife's body fell to a fateful foe's hand. As a distant general's orders rang out, the village was wrecked and set ablaze, and Botan had to fight through the thick haze. With his bamboo staff he began to battle, but soon the opponent only left him rattled. The more recognizable warrior quickly lashed Botan's face. Stunned, Botan retreated to a shack in sheer speed. In he walked, where whirls of flames made him want to melt. A burning board crashed down, almost causing his end, but nothing could compare to the betrayal he felt when he realized the other warrior was his old friend. Waking up with a wound deep in his side, Botan threw the burned board into the reach of the tide. He struggled to stand up in all his weight, determined to find that awful acquaintance and avenge his lost love, his revered romance. His old friend Fudo needed to pay for his actions. With the loss he had suffered, only pain could feel a fraction. In order to heal and get on with his valiant trek, Botan headed to the fields covered in thick, dark foliage. He had to find the helpful herb that would help him heal, its rarity causing many to think the herb wasn't real. He searched in the forest for 5 humid, hot days, leaving blood to be dried by strong sun rays. Drinking warm water from small streams and living off plants, on the 6th day Botan found it, one of the gods' great grants. Botan took the herb, ground it into a healing paste, and in a week his side was better. The gash had been replaced. And yet in this time Botan's desire for revenge had festered. He had to avenge his family and honor his brave ancestors, and so he began, brave but burdened at heart, to head to Fudo's village. He would force Fudo to depart from the very place he had pillaged. Finally he arrived at the coast of his homeland. He borrowed a strong, sturdy sailboat to weather the waves and fulfill his quest, a treacherous trial that would require his best. He pushed the boat off from his familiar sand, bowing his back and setting on his perilous path. The boat moved slowly against the waves' wrath. Hours into his voyage, Botan heard a splash, and was almost thrown from his boat by the thrash. The horrid head of a beast rose above into air, for it was the solemn sea spirit, Umihoshi. Botan remembered the price to those who flee. So quickly he rendered the required fee, a basically bottomless barrel of gorgeous goods. From the terrorizing trap, Botan was let down, and because of his cunning avoided to drown. Weary was he, as new, luscious land appeared, but the nearing confrontation with his foe brought fear. As he stepped off his boat, Botan dreamed of battle and breach, away in the fortress that was Fudo's base. He started on the reckless road to reach what he predicted to be a more painful place. Botan first got his bearings in a very vile village, for it was filled with Fudo's scornful soldiers. However, the lonely legion's deaths Botan did cause, and he continued on his path, ignoring all laws. He disregarded the villagers' safety pleas and headed into the wood with wonderful ease. 10 days' journey it would have been if Botan had gone around that forest and didn't drift. Yet Botan knew his revenge must be swift, lest Fudo realized that his old warrior friend had not come to the desired dreadful end. So he carried onward through that forest of fear, and in the morning hours of that next day, Botan noticed a mystical dragon on the limb shining brightly like evening sun rays. Wisely weary of this seemingly vicious visitor, Botan drew his sword to slay this inquisitor. But before he made this fatal move, he saw the dead demonic dogs around him, which left him in awe. This slender, dangerous dragon was not a foe. Instead, a wonderful watcher, saving Botan's body from crows. He then followed his generous guide in deep delight, for without it, Botan would have dreadfully died. Through the forest of deadly deities, the dragon protected him, until the troubling trip ended in the daylight dim. So from the forest Botan emerged, eager to earn his righteous revenge. But first he knew he must find a way in to that formidable fortress, so he could avenge his wrongfully slain wife and children. In a valley between majestic mountains, the palace lay, with the only east entrance being a small archway. From this solitary door a drawbridge dropped down over a deep valley where a small river surged. Into this valley our hero descended to remain undetected and unapprehended. Botan descended into the deep, dark gorge, whose roaring river he had to forge. Botan thought of his late bride, the anger aggressive within, and crossed the raging rapids with a grin. Pulling himself out on the other side, he saw something shimmer next to the tide, a metal lock on a dented door from times of war. Here Botan put his strength to the test. 6 sudden strikes, and that daunting door fell from its nest. In the doorway he crept. Creeping on, completely stable, he stopped to see a face behind bars. It was the face of Fudo's father, Jai Sia the Able. In the light, Botan could see all the man's scars. Into the dark cell Botan peered, ready to strike a man he once revered. As Botan raised his sword high over his head, "Wait, my son," Jai Sia said. He continued, "Ask yourself now why I am kept calling in this cell. Fudo and I were taken captive by the Lord, or have our family accept death to his sword? Tribute for the general we had to demand of neighboring villages throughout the land. So it was in this way we had to sever the peace. With the alarming news from this terrible tale, Botan finally freed Jai Sia from his jail. Together they headed to the top of the tower to free Fudo from fate that very hour. From the dungeon Jai Sia and Botan crept, and in the night a dozen soldiers Botan slayed. Meanwhile the warlord drew out his blade. He was going to make Fudo pay for his refusal to obey. The villager's death destroyed Fudo's spirit and his previous plea to save his own life. The general prepared a surgical strike soon to make, as Botan blocked his sword and said, "His life is not yours to take." Fudo then opened his exhausted eyes, recognizing the voice he last heard in painful cries. How, he wondered, had Botan survived the burning house where he should have died? But Fudo lacked real time to wonder, as Botan and he looked at death together. The mighty warlord's breaking blows landed freakishly fast and soon would expose the weakness that lay on Botan's side. Fudo swiftly slid out of the warrior's way and grabbed his katana in order to enter the fight. The 2 old friends attacking were quite a sight. The general withstood many a serious strike and paid back Fudo with a piercing pike. That greedy general had just given his last, when Botan slashed him in his neck, neat and fast. So the daring duel now finished. Fudo feared a fateful death. Sudden anger gave Botan a thought. For my family I will watch his last breath, knowing this was against what Jai Seo taught. Kill me now, Fudo wailed with shame. To restore yours and my family's name, I should have denied the warlord's request and given my life in order to save the rest. Whatever you will, I accept my futile fate. Faced with killing one of his once best friend, Botan had to make one of his toughest decisions. The wise Jai Seo interjected. Despite the division, a real warrior's way is not to seek revenge out of hate, rather to forgive and make amends before it is too late. Botan then looked in Fudo's fearful face, dropped down, threw his sword away, and bandaged Fudo with his own gown. That day the reconciled brothers renewed their friendship and vowed to create a new empire in their kinship. In the following seasons, settlements soon were founded by the enemies returned to brothers. A new era of peace abounded, giving gifts of life and freedom to others.